The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Finally, after months of speculation and waiting, Rasmus Andersson on the move from the Calgary Flames to the Vegas Golden Knights. The trade in full, Andersson to Vegas, salary retained at 50%. No extension for him. We'll get to that in a second. Zach Whitecloud, a 2027 first, a 2028 second round pick that can become a first if Vegas wins the Cup this year, and rights to North Dakota defenseman Abram Wiebe. That's going to Calgary. What do you think of the trade on its surface before we get to other details?
Well, pretty good, given that this ended up being a trade for Rasmus Andersson as a rental player. And, there was an alternate scenario over the weekend where perhaps he was traded with an extension, possibly to the Boston Bruins, who had permission to speak with his agent and see if there was anything that would make sense. And might have been a little higher return if there was a contract tied to it. But, I think under the circumstances, this is pretty strong. And, the mere fact you're getting a first and a second, you're getting a right shot defenseman in Zach Whitecloud, who's under team control for a couple of years at a really favorable cap hit. And you're getting a prospect that the Flames like. And they have other prospects that play with him. So they've seen him play there. And, they see a future for him potentially in pro hockey, certainly as an NHL player. So I think you add that together for Rasmus Andersson and it's a pretty good return. A first round pick was a mandatory part of this, but then the other pieces, depended on the quality and what teams were giving up. And ultimately, they chose to trade Andersson to Vegas, as a rental, and they felt that was the best trade return they could get of the teams that were at the table.
What do you think of the fact that Calgary keeps making these deals with Vegas? If that 2028 pick turns into a first round pick, the Flames would essentially have Vegas's next 3 first round picks over the next 3 years. Just a small little joke here, but still kind of wild.
Yeah, I think it makes some sense. From a fan standpoint, I understand it might be painful to see more of your good players going to a good team in the same conference. I can understand why that would be a thought, but I think if you're doing Craig Conroy's job, you have to take that out of it. I mean, you really have to take the best deal possible for the Flames. And this was it for Andersson as a rental. I mean, I keep putting that asterisk on it, but I think there was probably even a little better package out there from the Bruins in the world where Andersson was signing a deal there. But I don't have any trouble with them dealing with the same team. And if you're on the Vegas end of it, I mean, you know that Noah Hannafin, who you got 2 years ago at the trade deadline from Calgary, and Rasmus Andersson have played a lot of time together. And, it's not to say that they'll necessarily immediately be paired in Vegas, but just having that sort of sample that it's worked for them in the past, that they would have some comfort together, I think also is appealing from the Vegas end. So you don't mind making that deal with a team because of the familiarity between the players you're bringing in. So I do think there's in some ways it does make sense, but I'm sensitive or can realize you might be like, oh no, so are we just developing guys to send them to the team that is competing for the Cup every year? I mean, I can see kind of maybe the psychological aspect of that. I mean, had the trade come together with Boston and Andersson goes there, I mean, it's a little different look, right? He's playing in the other conference. He's going to visit once a year as a visitor. You're never going to play each other in the playoffs unless it is in a Stanley Cup final, but not before then. This could be different. There's a world where, this rebuild goes well in Calgary. They get to being a playoff team again, and they're drawing Vegas in round 1, and it's some familiar faces on the other side. But, I think as the GM, you really can't get caught up in that. It's about getting the best assets in the door for the organization. And, as I said, I think this was a reasonably good return. I don't know that you could have expected much more for Andersson being traded as a rental.
How close was Boston to actually acquiring Rasmus Andersson?
Well, I think it was really close because the fact that they were granted that permission to talk to the agent suggests to me that was the last piece of the trade, that if there was a deal that each side could agree upon, that that Calgary liked the deal enough to grant them that permission. So I think it does tell you that it was pretty close. But at the same time, you have to remember where Rasmus Andersson is. I mean, right now he's due to become a free agent July 1st. And he knows for a fact, we're already into January. If he gets to July 1st, he can go wherever he wants. He can go to the highest bidder, what have you. In the circumstance where his agent's negotiating over this weekend at the end of last week, like he's only dealing with Boston. If Boston doesn't want to give him quite the terms he wants, I think it makes sense that he got to the end of this process, Julian, that it got to Sunday and his agent informed the Flames, look, we're just not going to entertain a deal right now. I mean, first of all, it can be a lot to think about in the season. And secondly, his market was restricted in that moment. Well, effectively to two teams. He could have signed in Calgary, although the Flames weren't interested in that in where they're at in their cycle. And he could have signed in Boston as of the weekend. But, his leverage really is going to free agency. It's not to say, I would expect just with the track record here and the fact that the players believed to have wanted to be in Vegas if he had to be traded out of Calgary, that they'll come up with a contract with the Golden Knights. But, I can tell you there were no contract talks ahead of time. There was no negotiation in secret with the Golden Knights. They were comfortable making the deal they made for him as a rental. I think just knowing their history, that they got Hannafin signed a month after they traded for him, knowing that it's an appealing place for players to play. I just think they didn't need the same assurances, but for Boston to give up the kind of package that they had on the table, it had to include a contract. And look, Anderson's 29 going on 30. He can sign an 8-year deal still. And I think that's going to have appeal to any player that has the kind of leverage he does right now, because as of next September, that 8-year option is off the table with the changes in the CBA. And I think going to a non-tax jurisdiction, or one where he is subject to state income tax as he would be in Boston, the number is going to be a little higher on that contract than it would be for him to sign in Vegas. So, to say it was close, and that Calgary liked the trade on the table. The Bruins obviously loved the player and had a window to try to sign him, but they weren't able to reach that agreement. And so, then the package Boston puts on the table isn't quite as good because they're not interested in him in the same way if he might just leave as a free agent. And, ultimately that's how he winds up in Vegas on Sunday night.
Are we able to say anything about what that package might have been? Maybe just to stoke a little bit more of the imagination from Bruins fans?
Well, I think it's similar package to what Vegas traded, except the player coming across in Mason Lohrei, who was discussed from the Boston end of it. He's a younger player, maybe a little higher upside than you might see in Zach Whitecloud. Certainly someone that could be part of the core of the Flames. We can see what they're doing here, right? Now this opens up opportunities for Zane Parak. They're going to skew younger, I think, as the season goes along, and they have made some nice draft pick choices in recent years. And so he could have maybe been a little more part of that. Now, all that being said, what I've been told is that, Zach Whitecloud has not been acquired just to be flipped here. I think that the Flames want to get to know him, see what he can be. He is under contract, as I mentioned, for a few more years. So, I think that they see him as being part of the team, at least in the near term, I'll call it. And maybe we're talking about him getting traded somewhere down the line again. But, they certainly, my understanding is he's also been acquired here to join their team. As Lohrei would have been if the Bruins would have went through. So, yeah, look, there's always a lot of moving pieces in these things. And clearly there was multiple teams at the table here. The Dallas Stars were believed to be part of these conversations into the weekend. At least one other team that I'm not sure who it was, because no confirmation there. But there was a lot of I think there was a lot of different scenarios and variables as can happen when you have a player like this. And look, we'll see what happens with the Rangers now. But this might be one of the bigger trades of the year. Certainly one of the more impactful players that changes hands. We've already had the Quinn Hughes trade, of course. Probably that will likely go down as the largest trade of the season. But this is a big name off the board, well ahead of the trade deadline that would have been right around the top of any of those lists. Right until he was dealt, or March 6th came, whichever came first.
Sticking with Calgary, what about some of the other names that could be trade possibilities heading up to the trade deadline?
Well, I'd be curious to see what they do now. the obvious two for me are Blake Coleman and Nazem Kadri. Both of those players, they're not in the situation Andersson is, right? They have term left on their deals. These trades don't have to happen now, and the Flames could still have them as trade pieces down the road. We know that the Calgary's kind of walked this delicate line, right? They haven't leaned fully into what we might call a rebuild. They've obviously traded a number of players in the situation of Rasmus Andersson that were going to be in a position to leave for nothing if they didn't make those moves. If you go back a couple seasons, I mean, from Jacob Markstrom to Zadorov to Elias Lindholm
to Foley.
I mean, this has been a pattern. But, one thing the Flames haven't really done is trade away players like that with 2 years left on their deal, for example, as Blake Coleman has. And so, I think that those two players go most into focus for me, because I do think, especially in the case of Coleman, who's a little cheaper and has less term than Nazem Kadri. I mean, I just think there's a bunch of teams out there that would love to get their hands on him. I think he could bring back a nice package in terms of the return. But, if you trade him and maybe Kadri, I mean, you're really denting your competitive window for this season and maybe next season too, because those are pretty trusted veteran players that I think help set a culture that can be important parts of your team, even if you're not in a position to chase the Stanley Cup. So that's still the fundamental question that I don't have an answer to. I mean, certainly my impression is Calgary is not approaching the deadline like they have to move those guys, but teams are going to keep calling. And once you start stepping in this direction, I mean, kind of feels like maybe you should keep going there, but it hasn't been the Flames' DNA.
They should.
It hasn't been their DNA though, they've resisted it.
You're absolutely right. They have resisted it. And to your point about Coleman and Kadri and some of the veterans in that room, you're right. You want to establish some kind of culture where you're not tolerating losing all the time. And those two players, Coleman and Kadri, with cup winning pedigree, like, I get what you're trying to set in Calgary, but those guys would be really good on some contending teams right now. If you just, and I get it, the Flames right now, not that close to the bottom as I thought they would be. They have won some games in recent weeks, but I just think if you're at this point where you're able to make that trade work with Rasmus Andersson, you get the haul you get, now's the time to strike it with Nazem Kadri and Blake Coleman and other assets you can move. It doesn't make sense to keep paddling in this boat where you're hoping for some kind of competitive window and be in that mushy middle. That's been a problem for the franchise for years.
Right. And those guys are both on the other side of 30. And, effectively, they're not going to get better as players. The longer time goes on, there's more injury risk. There's more risk of age-related decline. There's more, there's a lot of reasons if you can get something that makes sense now to do it. You and I might argue, though, it would have made sense to trade Rasmus Andersson a year ago. I know
what's funny about that. I was going to bring that up because if you look back at what last season was like for him, remember he played the last dozen games on like a broken leg. Like, this is a guy who has gone through all these different injuries at different points over the last few seasons. Like, one part of me says like, yeah, well, what could you have gotten from last summer? But also, would that package have been the same? I'm very curious to that. Like, I wonder what that would have been like if they did flip him in the summer.
Yeah, and a lot of teams don't want to give up premium assets for a player that they're only going to have for one playoff run. I mean, at least last year, there would have been the idea you have him for two. And, but to be fair, and I credit Andersson for this, he was not having his best season last year. He's had a major bounce back this year. And he's played excellent on a Flames team that is quite porous. It hasn't been porous in his minutes, and he's played difficult minutes. He's been playing 24 minutes a night, scoring goals. He got in a fight last week. I mean, like even though this has been obviously weighing on his shoulder to some degree, I mean, he didn't let that affect what he had to do on the ice. And I think that put the Flames in an excellent position here to really maximize what they could out of his trade value. But, I might argue someone like Coleman, and no one knows this for sure, but like you can get a better return now when you have two playoff runs with him than waiting till next year when he's a pending UFA and then it enters into the equation. Is he going to do an extension? It can be a little messier trading a player the way the Flames just had to make this Andersson trade. Now, they got it done, but he even ended up playing a couple extra games. I think that initially he even thought he was going to play. because, there was lots of teams at the table. There's a negotiation going on the side. The Flames had to see, is there a contract that's going to work in Boston? Obviously didn't come to fruition, but, in some ways it's almost just easier to trade someone with a little bit of term left. I think the Kadri situation is a little different. There's probably a little hesitancy there. While a lot of good teams love the player, they might be thinking, what's that contract going to look like with 3 more years on it after this year at $7 million? So that one is a little bit more of a complex decision, but Coleman, there'll be ample opportunity to trade him. It's a big question about whether they're actually going to pull the trigger and do it, though.
And if I'm a contending team, and maybe there's some bias having seen Coleman as long as I did in Calgary, I would find a way to add him to my third line. Just worked so hard at both ends of the ice. And if you put it with a strong defensive center, you have a really solid third line. Not to mention, remember when the Tampa Bay Lightning won the Stanley Cup, part of a really great line with Barclay Goodrow and Yanni Gourde as well. He knows what it takes to win in the playoffs. I would add him to my team. And of course, same deal with Nazem Kadri. Yeah,
and I think the cool thing, you're right, like the Tampa experience is like proof of concept, I'd call it. But if you look at Coleman's production, like he remains that player. Like that's because, those cup wins now 5 years ago from the 2021 cup win, a lot can change, but he's still, the underlying numbers there are strong. Like all kinds of good things happen when he's on the ice. He kills penalties. He scored a number of shorthanded goals. I mean, it just a very toolsy type of player making $5 million on the cap. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, I think, for other teams to want him. I've always wondered about Dallas with him. I mean, just being, one of the few Texas born players in the league. Obviously the Stars are in the exact kind of window where they can use players like Blake Coleman. I mean, not hard to play fantasy GM and behind my microphone here and be like, hey, that would be a good fit. The Montreal Canadiens, I know, are very tempted by Blake Coleman, but I think the list is long. I mean, Tampa even has this pattern lately of bringing back some former players. I wonder about the Lightning.
Yanni Gourde's already back.
Exactly. Ryan McDonough came back. I just wonder if the Lightning even would take a look at him if he became available. But again, that's still in the Flames' control and not entirely clear at this moment how deep the cuts are going to come beyond this Rasmus Andersson trade for Calgary.
Anything else you'd like to mention about the trade? Anything maybe from Vegas's perspective about what they could do next?
Well, I respect the hell out of the Vegas Golden Knights. I got to be honest. I know some people roll their eyes at them or, groan at this. Like this to me, I don't have a hockey team. Obviously the job we do, but if this was like, I'm a Jays fan, as everyone knows, if this is how my GM operated running a team, it's great to be a fan of a team like that. Like every single year they are all in. And I think they're really smart with how they go all in. They don't generally give up the kind of assets we saw in this trade for rental players. And while I know Andersson's a rental at this point in time, I just strongly believe they're going to find a way to extend him and get him under contract. And they've been really coming on of late, the Vegas Golden Knights, winning a lot of games, but they haven't replaced Alex Pietrangelo, right? Who has missed this entire season. It won't be available at all after a hip procedure. Probably kind of operating under the assumption we're not going to see him playing the NHL again. And, just getting a right shot D that isn't exactly Alex Pietrangelo, but is giving you a reasonable proximity of, can move the puck, plays with some moxie, some jam. I mean, there's a lot of spirit in Rasmus Andersson. The fact that there is some synergy there with Noah Hannafin in the past. I mean, I love this deal from the Vegas end. I love the way that organization operates. And I mean, the West is a little weaker the longer you go down it, but Vegas just got a lot better. We love the 3 Central teams, I think, and Colorado, Dallas, and Minnesota have all been pretty strong. And I expect, frankly, all of them to be in a position where they're adding more talent to their rosters, before the deadline. The Edmonton Oilers don't maybe have as much to deal. They're kind of, they're in a spot where they've emptied the cupboards, but I have to imagine they're going to be looking for improvements. I mean, it's going to be at the top end of the West, I think, as we get to the playoffs. It's going to be some heavyweight battles in some of those series.
Probably a good time to segue over to your trade board, the version 4.0, now available to be consumed at The Athletic. And number one on your list, Artemi Panarin, which is also a good way to segue into the New York Rangers as a whole. A couple days ago, Chris Drury dropping a letter to fans, letting them know they are entering a retool. It is not a full rebuild, echoing letters of years past, thinking particularly of Jeff Gordon when he was still working with the team. What did you think of their letter, and what do you think about Artemi Panarin's future?
Well, I don't have any issue with the idea of a letter. Like, I think it's good to communicate to your fans. I think being transparent about what you're doing, you know, these are public facing businesses. A team like the Rangers has a massive fan base. You know, like, part of this is maintaining the belief of the people that help your organization be what it is. So I don't have any issues with letters. I do, you know, I think some of the language in this one, like calling it a retool, to me it's sort of stretching things, because to me what they've just done in the last 12 months is a retool, right? Like, they've traded Trouba and Kreider and went out and signed Gavrikov and, you know, they've made sort of a series of moves that I would call a retool on the fly to the team that had been in the conference final not too long ago. It hasn't worked. You know, they haven't had the kind of bounce back you'd expect. You look down the spine of this team, and there's lots of players to like, including Vincent Trochek, who's, you know, finds himself fifth or sixth on the board. I can't remember off the top of my head, but, you know, he arrives on the trade board now after this letter. You've got Mika Zibanejad there, but, you know, these guys, they're 33. Like, to me, a retool suggests you keep sort of, you trade around the fringes and keep the main pieces in place. I don't know that you can do what the Rangers need to do without kind of cutting into that to some degree, which is, you know, one of the main reasons Trochek is on the board. I think he would have, you know, a lot of demand around the league, you know, playing a premium position, you know, contributing really on both sides of the puck, still on a manageable contract. You know, so it's an interesting time for the Rangers. You know, the Panarin thing is going to soak up a lot of the attention, and naturally so. I mean, we don't see players with star quality traded midseason in the NHL too often, Quinn Hughes notwithstanding. But, you know, Panarin's an elite offensive play driver, but he controls the process, right? And so, you know, I don't know what the return's going to end up looking like for him, because him or his agent can go to management and say, I'm going to go to this one team, and name one team. And, you know, it kind of stifles what you can do in terms of putting together a trade. Now, I think symbolically it's important for the Rangers to get something back for him. You know, clearly this is a season that's not going to result in playoff games. You know, they've already said they're not signing him. Like, they're not even considering trying to bring him back. So this, you know, the end is coming one way or another. You know, why not at least get traded somewhere, have a chance to play in the playoffs, you know, maybe even start to think about his own next move. So yeah, it's, there's a lot going on there. I'm a little bit, I don't fully buy that it ends up being just a retool, although I realize it seems like whether it's the Canucks or, like, we're always into like a little bit of semantics with these characterizations, right? But to me, what the Rangers need is a pretty deep turnover. You know, a lot of their best players are they're at the wrong side of 30. The team can't imagine it's going to be back to chasing a Stanley Cup while they're still at their peaks. I mean, you know, some of it just might be, like, I'm not saying the Rangers themselves don't know this. Some of it just might be how they're packaging it to fans, basically.
Yes. I wonder with Artemi Panarin, who, as we've mentioned already, holds his fate in his hands in terms of a possible destination. I wonder what could be next for him. I wonder what teams could even have the inside track on him. It seems like it's been pretty quiet in terms of figuring that out. For example, I would love to see him. This is just kind of random, but like, it'd be cool to see him in Minnesota. I know that they already did the big Quinn Hughes trade, but it'd be cool to see him kind of making that team stronger in a year where it seems like the three strongest teams are all in the same division with Colorado and Dallas. But if you're trying to keep up in that arms race, like, what a way to do it if you're Minnie. But that's just me throwing that team out there.
Yeah,
like,
I think Minnesota, like, one
sense?
issue, well, not just one, but they've kind of cut into what they have to trade.
Yeah.
And, you know, so there's that aspect of it. I'm not sure if they fully want to go there with Panarin at this point in time. I mean, obviously it's a big cap hit, even if there's, money held back by the Rangers. Like it's a kind of a complicated deal for the teams that are really trying to win the cup because you don't usually have a lot of flexibility there. What does the trade look like? Minnesota might need some help down the middle. More
than anything.
They did trade Marco Rossi, of course, as part of that package to Vancouver. So, I don't know that it's a perfect fit in Minnesota. I think it's like I can see why you're imagining it, like just Bill Guerin just at the blackjack table, just doubling and tripling down on.
Oh yeah, like you're building up the arms race. That's purely off of that and me just thinking about it and not taking the time to actually sit down and measure or not whether it should be the right fit.
Right.
You're right. They do need centers though.
I think from a team perspective, and again, this isn't Panarin's perspective, like I think Washington makes some sense. The Capitals have been pretty open about wanting an impact, top six kind of winger in their roster. And, I just don't know, maybe the age might scare them off a bit because I don't know in the Capitals' minds that it's a short-term thing. Like I think they, for example, they were chasing Nikolai Ehlers in free agency last year. Like I think that they're looking at a longer-term need that's been there for a while that they'd like to address if they can. It's hard to say. I mean, Carolina, frankly, is always in these sort of things, but I don't know how Panarin views that. And really the question is Panarin willing to go somewhere at this trade deadline and then still maybe hit free agency, like basically move 2 more times within the next 6 months? He might be or he might not. I still think my sense of his end of everything is he's still kind of processing this. Like I think this, well, it's maybe been clear. It's easy sometimes to see from the outside, hey, this Rangers team is not going where they want to go and they're going to have to make some hard decisions. I think when you're a player, you don't always see that or feel that. Like you always believe that the next win streak's going to get your team back to where you want to go and all those things. So I think Panarin's still kind of digesting everything going on here. But rightfully given the star power, the name value, he's led the Rangers in scoring for 7 straight years. The fact that he's available, and I'd say even a little bit more than available. I mean, the team's effectively told him, we're not bringing you back. Like it's over. Basically, how do you want this to end? It's ending. So, that's what vaults him into that top spot on the board, but don't really have like, these are the 3 best teams, 100%. The teams are in, he wants to go there kind of scenario just yet. Cause this is still just kind of unfolding in real time.
Nobody, and I mean nobody, likes to compromise on comfort. We feel that when we wake up super early to go to the airport for a getaway flight. We feel that when we wait in long lines to get in at the movies, waiting for your favorite sneaker to drop, or to get into the concert venue for your concert of choice. Let's not compromise when it comes to style. And that's where Mack Weldon comes in. They have a great Ace collection that makes it effortless to look put together while feeling truly comfortable. Inspired by their best-selling sweatpants, Ace combines everyday comfort with long-lasting and confident looks. They have bomber jackets, half zips, crew necks, sweats. Mack Weldon has it all. And to be honest with you, their clothes feel really good. And I need to pick up a pair of sweatpants from them. And if you want to do so yourself, you can look at your collection of clothes, get them upgraded. Go to MackWeldon.com and get 20% off your first order of $125 or more with the code CJ. Mack Weldon's Ace Collection, comfortable anywhere. That's MackWeldon.com and get 20% off your first order of $125 or more with the promo code CJ. It's late at night, you're scrolling through your feeds and you come across the one thing you've been searching for. I've gone through that so many times. I love shoes. I love collecting shoes. And it's happened to me before where I see a pair I like, I click on the item, I add it to my cart, and just as I'm about to, go through checkout, put in the address, I don't have my credit card near me. And then salvation. That purple pay button that has all my information saved, making checking out as simple as a tap on your screen. That is life with Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the United States. From household names like Mattel and Allbirds to brands just getting started. And you can get started with your own design studio. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. And if you get stuck, they are always around to share advice with their award-winning 24/7 customer support. See less carts go abandoned and more sales go with Shopify and their Shop Pay button. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/Johnston. That's shopify.com/Johnston. What about the rest of your top five? You mentioned Vincent Trochek, who's actually number 6, but still, we can lump him into this conversation if we want to. But number 2, Kiefer Sherwood. Number 3, Nazem Kadri. Number 4, Dougie Hamilton. And number 5, Luke Schenn. Anything on the rest of your top 5 or top 6 if you want to mention Trochek?
I love these boards because when you put it in that, like, it's a variety of players in a variety of situations and circumstances. Kiefer Sherwood, highly attractive contract player, having a good year. I know he's out with a small injury at the moment, but as Vancouver looks to do what the Rangers are doing, what maybe Calgary is going to do, and start selling off some assets, he's the easiest one to play. Wouldn't be at all surprised if we're talking about him getting traded before the February 4th Olympic roster freeze kicks in. There's been a lot of action around Sherwood. I think that one thing that's helped that is the Canucks, I think, are willing to lower their ask on him somewhat and consider maybe a second round pick and a prospect rather than holding the line at a first and a prospect. Obviously depends on the quality of player you're getting back, for exactly where that ends up. But, he's number 2 because he's in huge demand. He's a unique asset at, less than a $2 million cap hit, potentially pacing towards scoring 25, 30 goals this year, physical forechecking type of presence, just unique in a lot of ways. So he's up that high. 3, you got Kadri, who I touched on briefly before. He's a center. I think Calgary's in a posture where, they're going to have to think about trades. And while Kadri, by no means do I get the impression he's forcing himself out of Calgary. Like he's knows where he's at in his career. He's a competitive guy, built for the playoffs in a lot of ways. And I just wonder how long he'll remain patient as he sees another quality teammate go out the door. How long does he want to stick around? Maybe there's an opportunity for him to force the hand of the team. Dougie Hamilton, no surprise to see him vault up the board after the healthy scratch situation in New Jersey. His agent putting out a statement saying that that's just done because they're trying to force him out of town effectively. Also though, with Andersson gone, it's another right shot D. Teams that missed on Andersson. It's not a perfect comparable as a player, but he does fulfill some of the same aspects of the game. Maybe not the physical nature of Andersson's game, but puck movement, big mobile guy that plays the same position. So that elevates him. And then number 5 was Luke Schenn. Winnipeg's actually run into a couple injuries on the blue line, Colin Miller of late. So, might slightly alter what they're going to do, but they have a lot of defensemen. And, it's pretty clear that Schenn is one of the pieces that they're dangling. I know there've been trade discussions with other teams on him, and he's another player I could see dealt relatively near term, which is why he's up a little higher than he was on the last go round.
Also, to round off the rest of the top 10 here, I know we got to Blake Coleman, who's at number 9. I'm especially intrigued at number 7 and number 8. Elias Pettersson from Vancouver and Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Remember the big offer sheet saga with him in Montreal and Carolina a couple of years ago. Those 2 names in your top 10. What are you hearing on both of them?
Well, Pettersson, look, Vancouver couldn't be more open for business, and it's another season where he's played better than last year by all accounts, but he's still not at the level he was when he signed that contract. And I just think that there's still going to be teams out there that are at least intrigued by his skill set, by what he's been, and wondering, can he get back there? Is there an opportunity to get this player now and see kind of his blossoming again? And I made the point on a previous show, but usually when a team trades for a player that becomes like an impact, say center, like those high demand positions that are hard to fill if you don't draft those guys, you're usually getting that player under some amount of distress. It's because of a situation like this. Otherwise, the team would never even think about trading them. And so I just think he's pretty compelling that he is available and on the market, that the Canucks are listening on everybody. And yes, not the guy that earned the contract 2 years ago, at least not in terms of the production you're seeing on the ice. But, can that be unlocked again? Is some of this the team, the situation, the baggage, there's all kinds of things. I mean, I know for sure that the biggest impediment to a Pettersson trade from the Canucks end is they're worried that he would go somewhere else and be the guy he was, and that they're not going to be trading him at anywhere near peak value if that deal comes down. So, kind of an intriguing name. And so again, star power gets him inside the top 10. With Kotkaniemi, he's lost his grip effectively on a regular everyday spot with the Hurricanes. I think he's a piece that they could trade as, look, if they re-engage on Pettersson, maybe we're talking about those two being part of the same deal. Obviously it would take a little more from the Carolina end to make that happen. I didn't group them together for that reason, but it's just occurring to me now as I say it out loud. But I think that a fresh start could be in order there. They picked up Philp off waivers from Edmonton, and as a right shot centerman that they can have on the fourth line. And, I just think that Carolina's always creative, frankly. They're looking for ways to find upgrades anywhere they can in their roster. And Kotkaniemi, there's some concerns I would see under the hood with, even though he's never became a big point producer necessarily in the NHL, he was a pretty strong play driver if you looked at the underlying numbers. And a lot of that has stopped happening this year. He's lost some faith in his coach. He's not playing every night. And so, we know there's a number of centers here, frankly, that I've listed. They're not all likely to move, but, teams tend to need help at that position. And so I think that's what informs Kotkaniemi being where he is on the board, is just that he plays a position a lot of teams have some holes at, and, he's kind of falling, his career's headed in the wrong direction right now with the Hurricanes.
You have Steven Stamkos at number 10 on your list here, and he's been on your board for quite some time.
That's a drop, though. 10 is a drop.
It's not like there's a reason for that drop. I'm assuming we're on the same page here, but like if you look at the Nashville Predators right now, as we're talking, they're literally a point out of a playoff spot, which I didn't expect from this group. Explain the drop. Explain what you're hearing on Steven Stamkos and why you have him at number 10.
It's almost a paradox. Like early in the year when he was higher on the board, the Predators weren't winning very much and he wasn't scoring very much. And, and then whatever the blurb would have said, I would have probably pointed out, he makes a lot of money. He's got 2 more years beyond this on his contract. It's going to be hard to move that contract because he's not performing well. Well, lo and behold, Steven Stamkos has gone on a heater. He's passed 20 goals already this season. The Predators have won a ton of games through November and December, put themselves in a position, climbed out of that early season hole. And so on one hand, that makes Stamkos, I would argue, a little more marketable as a player to be shopped and moved because, you're seeing that he can still be a pretty effective goal scorer for a team that might need that kind of help. Yet, why would the Predators trade him when they're so close to the playoffs? I think ultimately Nashville knows they need to get younger. I'm not saying 100% he's going to be dealt by any means. He's also got a no move clause. So there's a lot of complications there, but I still think he needs to be reflected pretty high on the board because it wouldn't be at all surprising to see him traded this season. I think the fact he's gotten his play has taken an uptick, has made him a little more appealing to other teams. And we'll just see where things end up in Nashville. I mean, look, way lower down on the board, I've also got Michael Bunting, I've got Jonathan Marchessault, and I've got Ryan O'Reilly right in the last spot. So there's a lot of Predators representation here. But they may not get to a point where they just don't sell. And that's some of what we're dealing with. This is such a weird year because when you think about the impacts of an Olympic break is we're sitting here January 19th, right? So you've got quick math, 46 days till the trade deadline. It's a long time, but teams don't actually have a lot of games left before the trade deadline because no one plays a game for 3 weeks in February. So, a team like Nashville being this close now, like they probably don't have an ability to fall that far out really, unless they lose 10 in a row, which I'm certainly not predicting. So, they're going to be left with an interesting choice one way or another. And look, maybe they punt this decision to the off season or to next year, because Stamkos does have term left on his contract. But, he's been filling the net, and there are teams out there that can use some scoring. So I think that he's a stock trending in the wrong direction if you're talking about players likely to be dealt. And frankly, if you could buy futures options on Trade Board 5.0, I would suggest that you might be smart to even pick Stamkos going lower and lower, because that might be what happens here. But a lot of it will be impacted obviously by what I'm hearing and then what's happening in the standings and if the Predators do remain in that mix.
I don't know if you want to give our faithful listeners options to buy stock in players going up and down on future trade boards. That might start something crazy.
I'm not suggesting, because I don't want to even be in the middle of that, because ultimately I'm the one who decides where each player falls on this board. But I'm just saying he's probably more likely to head south than north at this point. But 4-game losing streak and some new intel, some new conversations getting out there. I mean, this is the exercise, right? We're just trying to, in the moment, order the players in some kind of order that makes sense in terms of how trades are going to go, and then we react as the market shifts.
Anything else you'd like to mention about some of the other names on the list? Andrew Mangiapane is at number 11. Alex Tuch in Buffalo is at 12. One Toronto Maple Leaf on the list in Simon Benoit. He's at 19. Connor Garland, Jake DeBrusk. There's been some stuff with him too. Robert Thomas is on this list as well. Before there's one other guy I want to get to. I'll keep them separate. But anything else you'd like to mention throughout the rest of your list? Well,
Tuch's fallen big time too for similar reasons. I mean, you see the success Buffalo's having. It's just hard to imagine any scenario where you'd want to disrupt that. And Jarmo Kekalainen, still hasn't signed him to an extension, but he'll be an intriguing one. I just think with the way things have gone for the team, it's becoming far and far more likely that he's going to be remaining in Buffalo, but they still have to come to terms on a deal. And he's got some leverage, because the other forwards that were around him is pending 2026 UFAs have largely signed already elsewhere. And so if he wants to hit the market, I think he's in for a big payday. And I mean, no matter how it turns out, I guess it's good if you're Alex Tuch. But, with the Sabres, roaring back into this and being in the playoff hunt, it becomes harder to imagine him being moved.
Okay. The one player I wanted to just kind of single out, Jordan Binnington, the one goaltender you have on your list. Not a really strong goalie market out there for trades, it looks like.
Yeah, nor free agency. I mean, that I guess they probably go together, but a lot of the players that could have been UFAs this summer as goaltenders have signed extensions. I'm thinking Stolarz at the start of the year, Markstrom signed an extension, but there's a few others. It's a hard position if you are looking for an upgrade, right? And the Ottawa Senators, who you're covering every day, could tell you the same thing, right? It's not easy. I mean, it's why they made the trade for Allmark and paid him the contract he did. And we know he's been away for a personal issue, working his way back now, but you need him at some point to come back and basically perform at the level that earned him that contract, because they signed James Reimer off the retirement heap. Not quite, but
played on Sunday, almost got them a win in Detroit.
Yeah. And I'm not, but James Reimer didn't have a job this year. He went,
you're right,
to stay sharp. He went and played at the Spengler Cup for Canada and Switzerland over the Christmas holidays and that. But, they had to go sign someone who hadn't played a game in the NHL since last April, in order to try to patch a hole. So that tells you, I mean, Laurent Brossoit was on the board. He got traded obviously to San Jose, from Chicago, in the last couple of weeks. And then there's just not a lot of other goalies, at least not yet. Now, I think there's a few situations where goalies could become available depending on the success or not of the team. But right now, if you got a goalie, hold on to him closely. I mean, even Edmonton, right? Tristan Jarry's gotten healthy there now. They have Connor Ingram up from the AHL and Calvin Pickard as well. Like, I think they're going to roll with 3 for the time being, because, it would be risky to even put a Pickard on waivers. I think at this point in time, I think the likelihood would be high that he would be picked up, just because there are teams with a need and between either health issues or performance concerns with one of their existing players.
now to bounce back to Ottawa. Could be a really interesting week. Linus Ullmark traveled with the team to Detroit this week, and they got games in Columbus and Nashville, so we'll be on watch for that. And I mentioned James Reimer, who played on Sunday. The goaltending situation for them, obviously in the news. They had the game on Saturday against the Canadiens, and some comments were said towards Levi Merlainen. They've kind of gone viral from Jake Sanderson. I don't think he was necessarily specifying Levi. I think he was making more of a comment on the goaltending as a whole, but it continues to be the topic du jour in the nation's capital with goaltending.
Yeah. I'll say this, and I know you're on the same page, or at least I believe you are. I'll give Jake Sanderson a pass. That was a pretty frustrating way to lose that game against Montreal, blowing a lead late, losing in overtime. And he had a whale of a game that night. Like, I'm sure in his mind, he's like, what more could I have done for this effort? And he's just a little frustrated and probably would prefer to take that comment back, but I don't hold it against him. I just think, sometimes right after a game can be an emotional time for players, especially when you lose in the manner Ottawa did that night.
4-point game, and no one's going to talk about it because goaltending ended up being the story. I'm pretty sure he would have talked to the team or Levi Merlainen by now about that. But yeah, anyway, weird time in Ottawa. Never boring in that city. Anyway, we should get to Ask CJ. We got a couple questions for you before we get on out of here. You ready?
Hit it, bud. Let's go.
Greg Chisholm wants to know, this question is a layup for you. Are the Houston Texans the worst NFL franchise in Texas?
Yes.
This is supposed to be a layup. Yes. There we go.
Yes, they are. Because even though Dallas didn't play a playoff game, I still believe in the Cowboys more than the Texans next year. We'll see. Big questions at QB, though, for the Texans.
Yeah, not that most.
Their defense was great this season, though.
Yeah, what a really good defense from Houston, but CJ Stroud just not impressive in that game against New England.
It pains me though to point out that a CJ fell short though in the playoff game. I mean, it feels like a CJ on CJ crime.
I didn't want to think about that. By the way, 15th consecutive year, we will have either the Patriots or the Kansas City Chiefs in an AFC championship game, with New England going up against Denver.
I'm not ready.
Anyway, next question.
I got to say, of the 4 remaining teams, like nothing excites me about the 4 remaining NFL teams.
Really? So Matthew Stafford potentially getting another ring, Sam Darnold reviving his career, Drake May on an MVP crusade, Jarrett Stidham.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, I'm going to watch the games. I'll watch the Super Bowl. Like I'm not hating, but there's not. I really wanted, the Bills are kind of, I'm a Bills. I would have liked to see them win. I'll just put it that way. Yeah. I can't even, I don't think you can say a team's your second favorite team because that's not really like it's Cowboys or bust for me, but I'm a Bills sympathizer. I know a lot of Bills fans. My nephew's a huge Bills fan. I would have liked to have seen them beat Denver, and then, I'd be at least hoping for them, entering the championship weekend.
I don't care. Let's go to this question from Michael Schatz. Scenario: a team trades a pick and top 5 protects it. Can that team also trade the remaining top 5 part of the pick? They still own it. That is a weird trade question.
I don't
yeah. This may have broken CJ's brain.
Well, because in either case, right? Let's think this through. Because the truth is, I do not know the answer, right? If I knew 100%, I would just say what the answer is. Yes. But when a team, effectively, when you trade protect a pick, like you designate what it becomes if that condition doesn't happen, right?
Right.
I mean, to take the trade that just happened on Sunday night, that effectively the Golden Knights traded Calgary their 2028 second round pick with the condition, if this condition is met, Vegas wins the cup this year in 2026, it converts to the first pick. So there's 2 picks that get tied up in that deal until the condition is sorted, right? So I wonder if you could do it, because you would be saying, I'll trade you my first round pick in this year if it falls in the top 5, but if it doesn't, it becomes another thing, whatever that would be. maybe my first round pick the following year, or whatever other asset you could tie to it. I'm going to check and I will come back. I like when I get a homework assignment. I will get a firm ruling on this, but my gut suggests to me you could trade that with the condition it becomes something else. So you could effectively you could split a first rounder into two parts, so to speak.
Please let us know what the answer to this question is. I need to know. We need to know.
I've never heard of it happening, and that's
me neither.
That's the one thing that you wonder about.
Shout out to you, Michael, for this question. Hopefully we can.
Because think about it, like the Leafs, for example, don't like one of the comments when we talk about the Leafs having trouble making trades right now is they don't have a lot of assets to trade. Mm-hmm. One thing they don't have to trade is their 2026 first round pick because that's promised to Boston, except it is top 5 protected. So could they trade the top 5 protected and then have it be like it becomes a 2029 first rounder or something? I don't even know if another team would want that. They might want it though, because it's kind of like a ticket in the lottery. And you're getting a fallback other option. But anyway, good question. I love it. We are 400 shows in and we still hear things that I've never even thought about. Have you ever considered this option?
No, not before I saw that question.
I love it.
I love this question. When I saw it in the list of questions we got, I was like, you know what? I want to see if this could melt CJ to the point that we're at now. And I'm glad it's worked out.
The way I reason through it, though, is it should technically be possible, but who knows?
Okay, next question from Charlie. Thoughts on Artemi Panarin to the Toronto Maple Leafs? Gets the winger they need. What would it take to get him, and could they afford to re-sign him?
They could afford to re-sign him. The Leafs actually have a fair amount of cap space for next year. Now, they obviously have some players on the current roster. We don't know if they're going to be back. Bobby McMahon, the Leafs have started chatting with his agent to see if there's something that can be done there. So, there's a few what ifs in terms of who are they retaining and the like. But the Leafs have a fair amount of flexibility for this offseason and beyond in terms of adding another big ticket. I don't see it as a trade as much just because of the hurdles I'm mentioning. I don't really know how they can win. We know the Leafs liked Rasmus Andersson as an example, but I just don't think ultimately they were a factor at the end of those discussions because they didn't have the first round pick you need. They just didn't have the things to win in that kind of bidding scenario. Now, I suppose I mentioned earlier in the show, maybe Panarin says I will only go to one team. I think if he did that, it would more likely be like a Florida team or something than coming up here to snowy Toronto. But I guess I would say you never know if he hits the open market on July 1st. I'm not sure they want to go older, but I mean, look, they're the Leafs. The Leafs are of a mind. I think they're trying to win every year. I know as we're recording in this exact moment, they're not even in a playoff spot, but they've fought pretty well the last month to get back into that conversation. And I think that they're kind of all chips on the table mode. So if there's a way for them to get them that makes sense, I don't think I can rule it out.
Last question for you from Sash. How are the Vegas Golden Knights doing these trades? Do they have an infinite pool of assets? I'm sure they're asking that question in jest, but since we talked about them a lot on the show, I figured it'd be a good way to bookend things.
Well, the one thing that gets lost with Vegas is they have a very good front office. They make a lot of good decisions, and they haven't made very many really bad trades. I don't know if there's any that jump to mind. Now, you're not ever going to bat 1,000, but they have. It's not just Kelly McCrimmon's the front facing as a general manager. Obviously, George McPhee's still there as a team president. But they have a lot of people working under Kelly McCrimmon, I think, that are excellent at their jobs, identifying players, understanding how to manage the cap to a way to maximize what they can do. And then they have a committed owner who wants them to be going for it again and again and again. So I think it's a dream scenario for what you want from a franchise, like an owner who is dying for you to win, a GM who's aggressive, who's got guts and is smart. And then you've got, younger people that aren't getting as much credit, in analytics and the like in terms of cap management. pulling in the same direction. So I think you add it together, and then you add in the fact it's a place that players want to play. It's a place with favorable weather, favorable taxes, where the team is going to be all in every year. And look, there's a push and pull to that. Like, if you get traded there, if you sign there, that if you're not holding up your end of the bargain, you're probably going to be moved. I mean, it's just a fact of life. But the way they're doing it is that they are an extremely efficient, well-run organization, and they have a great owner. So, I mean, it's hard to line all those things up, but they've managed to do it right from day one in Vegas.
I hope as people listen to your description of the Vegas Golden Knights, there are a lot of 100%ers, especially those who like to get themselves to the end of these episodes, who are seething at your description of the team. They are a villain for a reason.
That's fine, but the truth is, they're not doing anything illegal. They're not they're doing it completely above board. Like, other teams could be doing this too, but they're not nearly as creative in the front office. They're not as well run. They're not making as many good decisions, and they haven't created a culture where players want to play there as much. That's just a fact. And that's not all palm trees. That's not, it's goes way beyond that. Like, they do a lot of things right, and they've been doing them right literally since the expansion draft. And that's, I mean, look, I don't want the Kraken to catch a stray here, but we've seen the alternate timeline where, they haven't been awful, but they haven't become an impactful team. It's hard, right? Is the point. Yeah. But that's the other expansion team. But look what Vegas has been right since day one. So you're fine to feel however you feel about them, but I have a lot of respect for the way they operate.
I'm just picturing someone from Seattle listening to this, and I don't know if you've seen that 50 Cent meme where he's like, what do you say F me for? He just took a straight for no reason. I will give you this, though. I do think there have been some moves with Vegas that maybe not obviously going exactly the best that they would want, but to your point, yes, they are a cup contending team. They've been a cup contending team virtually every year since they've been in existence. They've missed the playoffs once since they've been in the league. Like, we're talking about a team that is the exception to the rule when it comes to expansion teams.
And they're not. I got news for you. No. They're not getting bad anytime soon.
No, I know some people were pushing back on the trade with the Flames and the first round picks going to Calgary, but I'm like, if you're a team like Vegas that you expect to go to the playoffs every year and contend, like, you're saying F them picks.
Yeah, and they're going to have to find players. Like, Mark Stone's been a beast this year, but, he's getting a little older. Like, they have to keep, they signed Eichel to the big deal. Like, the point is they got all their top talent locked in. That's the other thing. I mean, other than Rasmus Andersson, and I'm just waiting for that. Like, let's set a clock here. It's not going to go too long, I'm guessing, before there's a new contract for him too.
Right. Anyway, that's going to do it for our show today. We'll have a show later this week. CJ, great work as always.
Thanks, buddy. That was fun.
That was fun. We've had a lot of fun over these episodes. Anyway, subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. Day to all of our American listeners, and we'll be back later this week with a brand new episode. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.